So essentially, when I joined our digital, there was a couple of people doing recruitment. There wasn't a recruitment function. There wasn't like a machine or an engine. And I've had the great challenge of being able to establish that. So from ways of working to strategy to the right tools we should be using from scratch. And I remember that certainly at the very beginning, one of our biggest challenges was just not knowing what works for us. So how on earth could we hire these huge numbers without actually knowing how we could do it? Where do we even start? And I remember being in a meeting with our CEO. It was towards the end of 2016. We were looking at recruitment budget for 2017, what the strategy was going to be, what tools we could be using. I was trying to visualize how we could dial up certain tools and dial certain ones down depending on what numbers the business decided to go with eventually, and how much budget I'd have. And he asked me a question. He said, well, what's working for you now? And I just didn't really have a really succinct answer. I knew that we hired a few people, say, from LinkedIn, a few from a few other sources, but I really wasn't 100% sure what was working for us. And then when I drilled that down again, I thought, well, what isn't even our most efficient tool? So are we hiring a few people from one tool, but it's actually taking us, you know, to screen thousands of candidates and to find that one or two? And actually, if you look at that in isolation, that's probably not a good use of time or a good tool in itself. So it kind of stayed with me, and I wanted to kind of understand what I could do to really understand, and therefore to kind of tackle the volume challenge we were going to have in 2017, which was in the end 180-ish hires. So the challenges in itself is understanding what data was going to give the insight that we needed, how could I capture that, and then how could I tell the story of that, so what? And that's what I kept having to challenge myself with. So fine, this tool works, or this source, this screening process, but why does that matter? And then I needed to tell that in a story that would compel senior management. And I think it's once you can tell that story that you can then start to achieve the budget you want. And I did achieve the budget I needed for that extra tool that I thought that was going to help us get to where we needed to go. So what was the way forwards from there? Well, it was kind of understanding what I needed to capture in the first place to understand all of those wonderful things, and drill it down even further. But I think the first step was, as I say, understanding the data that would give me the answers that I needed. And then taking it a step further. So data in itself is something that I've talked about before, and I think for recruiters it can just feel like a bit of a mind block. And I think it's just, especially when it comes to volume, it's not something to be scared of. It is something that's actually going to really, really facilitate how you go about doing what you need to do. So yes, a multi-channel approach is the way forward, and I've always thought that. But then it's knowing and having the insight to understand what is the multi-channel. So what events, what tools, what sources, all of those questions. So understanding that data. And then starting from a point in which you can break it down, like we did with this funnel that you can see here. So, for example, knowing how many people that you need to speak to a week, and therefore how many of those are probably going to convert into interviews, and then how many of those are probably going to convert into final interviews, and then how many of those are probably going to convert into offers, and of those offers, how many of those are likely to accept. So that's when the ratios part really came into it, really. And it's from there that you start to see a bit of a story unfolding, and even that visual itself is one that I've taken into many meetings just to help kind of management understand what it is exactly we've got to do and the sheer task. So 300 plus conversations, for example, that might seem quite low to a lot of you in this room when you think about some of the volumes you deal with, but imagine if that was a bigger number. I think a lot of management don't really understand what it is that we do and everything that goes into it, so that's quite a nice way of demonstrating that. So what about if you just need to get cracking in the meantime, which I appreciate, that's why a lot of you are here. It's, yes, this is very nice, but it does take a bit of time to kind of capture data. I think it's definitely worth having that initial workshop in terms of what it is that you need to capture, what will work for you, what will give you that insight. But what if you do need to get cracking in the meantime? Well, we were in a situation this time last year where we had we were given 5 weeks to recruit 7 senior developers. So for anyone else in the tech market, you'll understand that actually just finding one really great senior developer in 5 weeks is a bit of an achievement anyway, if you take into account notice periods and everything. So we just thought, oh my goodness, how are we ever going to do this? So the first thing we did was that funnel, and we just worked backwards. We broke it down, like I say, and we worked out the ratios. And then we listed all of the tools that we used, which ones were working for us. And without even having that data of, okay, I've screened 100 from this tool, I've put 50 through to interview and I've hired 10, which isn't really a bad ratio. We had a feel as a team, we just have a gut feel as recruiters, kind of what was working for us. So without even that granular detail, you kind of have an idea. And we worked out how we were going to do it. So all of this helped us realise, right, we need to make 3 hires a week, or how many hires a week. And we're actually not too far away from a similar situation at the moment for an April start date. But all of a sudden, it just made us really visualise what it is that we had to do, and by when and how on earth we could do it. And then the next thing that we did was we communicated that challenge to the business. And I think self-promotion is something in recruitment that doesn't necessarily happen as much as it should. And really, without us, businesses wouldn't be able to operate at the level they'd like to, or certainly bring in the revenue they'd like to, especially in professional services where people are our revenue. So by communicating that challenge, it was a great way of managing expectations with senior management in terms of how possible this was going to be. We need to keep capturing, we need to keep analysing, because things do change, the market changes as well, and we need to be prepared and we need to track that. But essentially, at least we now have a hard-to-fill role strategy. So if we're ever in that really tight spot again, it's almost like, okay, let's go back. What did we do? How did we achieve that? And how can we work together to do that again? I think we need to be better at promoting ourselves. And getting that buy-in, and also but keeping our culture at heart as well. So within volume recruitment, it can be really difficult just to throw that out the window and just get people in. And I call that kind of panic buying. And we had to keep sense checking ourselves against panic buying with the wrong candidates that perhaps wouldn't have got through if you weren't in that situation. And that's where the stand-ups came in really helpful. We kept kind of challenging ourselves as we went round the circle, and someone was a bit umming and ahhing about a candidate. We say, well, would they be here on a normal period of time? And if it was a no, then we'd really have to challenge ourselves to say, well, why are they here, and should they be in the process? Yes, it might mean that we don't hit our target, but in the long term, we want to retain our culture, we want to retain our people, and candidate brand and company brand matters. I think managing expectations is really important as well. So just really communicating the challenges that you're under. Sometimes we can be the victim of our own success as well. So if we do really well, it's great for us, but the business kind of thinks it's easy and they'll just ask us to do it again and again. And if we don't really articulate the journey we had to go through to get there, they're not going to have an idea actually what's involved and how they can be more supportive if that situation were to arise again. Flex the process and don't constrain yourself. Think outside of the box. So with Digital, we are a really agile company. We can work in whatever way we want, and we're a really empowered recruitment team. So we don't need hiring manager approval for CVs. We know what good looks like and we run with it. So if you are running at a volume, maybe just think about where your blockers are. And if getting CVs reviewed by a hiring manager is one of those, just get rid of that step. If you know that role and you've got a track record of placing in that role, why do they even need to see it? Why do you need to involve them? Just go for it, run with it. And one thing that I haven't really spoken about is just working backwards. So unusually at And, we recruit to set start dates, which a lot of companies don't. I don't know, it'd be interesting to hear when we have a chat later just how you do it. But essentially, so we know, for example, our next start date is April 16th, and we need to hire a team to land on that day. So we need the right mix of diversity of skill sets, of levels, all to start on that one day. So for us, we work backwards. We go, right, okay, so 2 weeks before, we don't even want to be thinking about that date. We want everyone confirmed because it just will feel too rushed. We won't be able to give them a good onboarding experience. 2 weeks before that is the last date that we can work with people on a 4-week notice period, because it's going to be 4 weeks before their start dates. And then you keep working back, okay, so from that date, we can't work with anyone on a 3-month notice period. And it just helps you break down what you've got to do, where you should focus your sourcing as well. in terms of notice periods. It can be really, really helpful. Keep your process really simple and standardised, and there are 3 roles that we hire at Volume and Digital. It's developers, it's business analysts with agile delivery experience, and it's graduates, computer science graduates or similar. So we have a process that's really similar for all of those. It's standard, we know exactly what we need to do, and so does the business. So it's not complicated, it's a 2-step process essentially, or for grads it's a half-day assessment and that's it. So it's just about knowing how you can maximise the time that you've got with candidates, redefine it if it's long, identify your bottlenecks, start from the top and break it down. So if you need to hire 50 people, what does that mean in terms of phone screens? What does that mean, first of all, actually in terms of sourcing? So people that you just have to get in front of, because some of them will respond, some of them won't. So that's where knowing your ratios will help you, knowing what tools work well for you. And that's my next point. So really just know your strengths. See what you can do to maximise things that are working for you, where you get good quality candidates as well. So is that your referral scheme? And if you're not really leveraging that now, well, how could you do that? How could you run short, sharp referral drives, for instance, when you're feeling really under pressure? Don't let candidate experience and best practice slip. So when we are under pressure, we've got a lot of volume, it's really easy just to kind of let other things go, not give people feedback, forget about them, and it's just a really poor experience, and ultimately that might have a knock-on effect on your candidate brand through Glassdoor and other kind of tools where you don't want that to happen. You want your brand to only strengthen and grow, and that will help you in the long run. Communicate your pinch points, be realistic with stakeholders, highlight the risks. Yes, we'll hire you 50 people, but in order to do that, you're going to have to think about X, Y, and Z. Maybe that's more budget, maybe that's more people in your team. And if you don't do this, well, this is what is realistic. And then keep that forecast going and manage that on a weekly basis. And promote your challenge and achievements. Evoke business buy-in. Use Slack. Use whatever tools that you have internally where you can tell the business about your achievements and take them along with you, so that hopefully they will help. So they will start referring more people, for example, and they will be more supportive with their time when you need it for interviews.